morning, brethren. I'm very happy to share this week's Motivating Monday. I'm Isaac, and this week I've decided to speak on the topic of discouragement. Discouragement, by definition, is loss of confidence or enthusiasm. Other words then can describe it to be disheartened or demoralized. I think this would be a very pertinent topic to discuss because no Christian is immune to it, and oftentimes we are not as effective as we can be doing God's will or work when we're discouraged. So hopefully this short Motivating Monday segment will be helpful to you and to help you deal with discouragement and overcome it. When we consider why one might be discouraged, there can be a multitude of reasons, ranging from the thoughts one has to the trials and tribulations and struggles one might face in a moment, whether it be loneliness, failures, or physical infirmities. All of which can make one less fervent or their faith to waver. I remember especially in the case of Elijah in 1 Kings when we talk about discouragement. And if you turn with me, you can turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 16. So some context, this was a time of the divided kingdoms of Israel. After Solomon died, the kingdom was divided into the northern part of Israel and southern part, which is Judah. And they did not walk with God. Some kings did, but majority were idolaters and wicked. And it was the role of the prophets to be the messengers of God to bring the nations back. But we can imagine the difficulty when the hearts of the people were seeking after other gods and the rise of false prophets after false gods. So it's a nation of wickedness and a really bad place for God's chosen people. King Ahab was one of the rulers of the kingdom of Israel, and Elijah was one of these prophets. So you can read in verse 30. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, that he took the wife of Jezebel the daughter of Ahab king of Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. And Ahab made a grove, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. And we can also read in 1 Kings 18 verse 4 one of the things that he did. For it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. And so we see that Ahab was a wicked king with his wife Jezebel, drawing Israel away from Jehovah God over the years. And we had a nation that was serving Baal, where most of the prophets of God were gone, presumably killed. And God allowed a 3-year drought to punish the nation, and Elijah was told to confront Ahab, in which creates the context of a challenge versus the prophets of Baal, which I believe you'll be familiar with. So in verse 21 of chapter 18, Elijah issued a challenge somewhat like an ultimatum. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, How long have you between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, even I only remain a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let them therefore give us 2 bullocks. Let them choose 1 bullock for themselves and cut it in pieces, and lay it on wood, and put no fire under. And I will dress that bullock and lay it on wood, and put no fire under. And call ye on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God that answers by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, It is well spoken. And so if we carry on reading, we can see how the prophets of Baal would have cried out from morning to noon, right? Oh Baal, hear us. And even cutting themselves, right? But there was no answer. Their altar didn't light up. And on the other side, Elijah built his altar, even poured water on burnt offerings. But God answered his call and fire came. And so if you realize, this was great victory for Elijah and Jehovah God. In verse 39, And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, The Lord, he is the God, and the Lord, he is the God. And Elijah said unto them, Take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook of Kishon and slew them there. And so how the tables have turned, an absolute spectacle. There's no clearer way for the declaration of the one true God. Now the prophets of Baal were killed, and God sends rain back again. But the story doesn't end here. Today we are talking about discouragement. And it was in Elijah's case where he went from the heights of success and victory to the depths of despair that we can understand how discouraged he was. He had just proven the authenticity of Jehovah God to an unfaithful generation. He did so publicly, in such a way that was without a doubt, decisively, right? The authority and the legitimacy of the one true God. And yet, let's see what happened to him in chapter 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more so, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by the morrow about this time. And so despite all that has happened, how fire came from heaven, right? Jezebel still threatened Elijah's life. So imagine your very government wanting to kill you in the hardness of their heart and pride, when you're innocent, when you are upholding and doing the right thing. And to flee, Elijah had to go to another country, to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and then a day's journey into the wilderness. So from the highest victory and triumph, just like that, the refugee of a country, fearing for his safety and his life, on the run to another country and to even the wilderness. And so we see how Elijah in verse 4 was. Right. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, came, sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested him for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. So you see the despair that he had, how he would have felt forsaken. His fellow prophets were slain, whatever things he had done, all in vain, it doesn't matter, an unrepentant people, or in this case the queen, and even the Israelites, right? Their forgetfulness, or rather their lack of courage, when the same prophet declaring the one true God and proven it, he is being threatened, but no one will stand up and do something about it. That Elijah had no option but to flee the country, right? And to be tired from traveling and running, mentally drained from all the worries, worried about his very survival, his future, and such a great triumph backfiring. So just for a moment, compared to the discouragement that we might have experienced before, have you been discouraged because you have felt alone at times? Has your faith wavered because of others, both outside or within the body before? Or have you ever been physically tired or weary from all the work? So imagine Elijah's case, how that was turned up to the dial of 10, right? What more could he done? What more could he have done? How much clearer did it have to be than a 3-year drought and a direct challenge against their gods? That fire from heaven came, and to still end up like this, to be rejected by the queen, by his whole nation, to be fleeing, to have fellow prophets dead, and to have his nation absolutely blind to the fact that they are worshipping a false god, refusing to turn to Jehovah. So how alone he would have felt. How tired, how fearful, how hopeless it would have all seemed to him. But the great thing in this case is that you can see the remedy to this discouragement and how Elijah got back on his feet. Let's read chapter 19 verse 5, right? And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baken on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights, unto Horeb the mount of God. So this is God meeting Elijah's physical needs, which is the first point, right? Cake and water in verse 5 and 6, and a lot of sleep and a lot of rest, right? 40 days and 40 nights just to recover and rest from this state of discouragement and weariness. And so for our application, perhaps when we're discouraged, maybe the best thing we can do is just rest for a moment. Take a moment to rest your body, rest your mind, have a meal and sleep, and to return to the situation with a fresh mind. Because the reality is that we are bound in this physical world, we are bound by physical limitations, and sometimes all we need is a little rest to overcome that discouragement, to overcome the physical weariness and approach that situation better after that. This is how God did it for Elijah, right? But this is also not the only remedy. We realize that God gives 3 assurances to Elijah. First, he shows his presence in a still small voice. He assures Elijah that there are still faithful people, and he promises, or rather gives Elijah a companion, right? And all of this does a few things, but it points to Elijah the fact that he's not alone, right? In a very physical sense, he was in a country where rulers have forsaken God, and a large majority of people has turned to worship Baal, right? But here's what God told him, right? In verse 18, Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which had not kissed him. And this is an important application. One can be discouraged when they see the wickedness of the world, or the vast work that needs to be done in the vineyard, or even be discouraged by the unfaithfulness of brethren. But why should we look at these things and be made unproductive by such thoughts? Shall we not instead think of the good things, on the faithfulness of the brethren of the church, brethren who has made huge sacrifices, brethren who has been great examples carrying the name of Christians, from the full-time workers to the workers at Four Seas, or even to the brethren on the other side of the globe, right, from Southeast Asia to the other side of the globe. Yeah, shall we not be instead encouraged by these good examples instead of discouraged? Right, so like Elijah, we must let our mind think on the good things. And remember that physically, we share a common faith with a vast number of people around the world, and that we are not alone in this Christian walk of faith. But more importantly, God also reminds Elijah spiritually that he's not alone. In this case, in verse 12, right? And after an earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. So for our application, this is also very relevant. How many times have we been discouraged or faith wavered because we forget God? We forget God's faithfulness, we forget God's promise, God's love, and God's care for us. When God has already demonstrated His perfect love and faithfulness to us through Christ. But I guess it's the very nature of the thing of humans to forget, right? But therein lies the relevance to be reminded that God is with us, to think on these good things, right? That God has not forsaken us, that we are not alone, right? To remember that in all things that we do and face in this life, we can bear and handle everything through Christ. That we have a faith in the greater value of spiritual things and the promises upheld by God, and to be secure by these things. In the same way, our discouragement can be overcome when we think on these things, to remember spiritually we are not alone, that we have God that is for us, to cleave on to the words of God and to cleave on to words of God and the Bible, lest we forget. And I think this will be further supported by how the Lord gave instructions regarding new kings and a new prophet Elisha for Elijah. Right? This is God's way of answering Elijah's prayers. And in the same way, we too can be secure. We know that with every temptation, none will be beyond our ability, and there will always be a way of escape. In 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13. And God will give us whatever we need to walk this Christian life. And of course, we know that God does not give us all that we request, like how we replied Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, that His grace is sufficient for you. But we can be confident in Romans 8 verse 28 that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. So in this case, I imagine He answered Elijah's prayers and gave Elijah what he needed. And in the same way, we can trust God, that God will do the same for us in whatever situation of discouragement that we might face. So from the life of Elijah recorded, it gives us important insight on dealing with discouragement, to rest when necessary, but also to think on the right things and be reminded that we are not alone, both physically and spiritually, and that we can be effective in the vineyard, that we can be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labour is not in vain in the Lord. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 58. And I hope you have been motivated. Thank you for your time, and I wish you a good week ahead.